All right. Well, it's a few minutes after, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining our training today. My name is Leah Razzo. I work for Department of Housing Stability, Asset Management, and Compliance team. My teammate Bridget is also on the line. She's going to be kind of keeping an eye on the chat for us and helping answer questions as we go. So this training is geared towards owners and property management companies that manage rental communities that have a loan agreement and covenant with the City and County of Denver for home funded units. And I'm going to share presentation. And can everyone see the slides? Yes? Okay, good. Good deal. Some of the things that we're going to be going over today are the required documents for the property itself overall, required documents to keep in your tenant files or resident files, income and asset verifications and how to go about those, income limits, rent limits, the student rule, the utility allowances, calculating rents, and following the rent guidelines. We're going to talk a little bit about the next available rule, marketing, reporting, and non-compliance issues. So every, 5 or 6 slides, I'll take a pause, see if there's any questions about anything we just went over. Feel free to also put all your questions in the chat. When we pause, we'll answer all those as well. So the HOME program came about from the National Affordable Housing Act of 1990. This program, the Home Investment Partnership Program, was created to expand and supply decent, safe, sanitary, and affordable housing. If you want to dig into the home regulations in detail, there's a link there for Title 24, Part 92, which will get into all the nitty-gritty of the home program. All right, so first up, what are some of the documents that you should have in place for your property? If you have a loan agreement and a covenant with the city for home funded units, first, you should always have a tenant selection plan in place. And that tenant selection plan should talk about how you're providing housing to low and low income families. It should talk about the lease obligations. Should talk about how you're selecting the residents, if you have a waitlist procedure and what is that, how you are responding to rejected applicants and why applicants may be rejected. Something important to note there is you want to make sure that you state if you're going to send out a rejection letter or denial letter, what's the reason and the time frame that you're going to be supplying that. Then, of course, also it should talk about the VAWA requirements, Violence Against Women's Act. A second really important document that you should have in place for the property is the Affirmative Fair Housing Marketing Plan. So the home rules and regulations state that if you have 5 or more home units at your property, then this marketing plan is required. If you do not have 5 or more home units, then you're going to want to make sure and take a look at the loan agreement with the city to see if that agreement requires it. So even if you do not have the 5 required units, the loan agreement with the city may still require it. So please take a look at that. And so you have a good understanding of if you need to have that in place at your property or not. Let's see. So written policies and procedures that you're going to want to have in place for your property. Um, what your recertification process is and how you go about it, the timeframes. Are you doing a self-cert or are you doing a full cert? What your transfer plans are, um, your rent collection policy, your file maintenance and retention. Something really important to note is if you take a look at the loan agreement with the city, a lot of times there is a paragraph in that loan agreement that talks about um, file maintenance and retention. And in a lot of agreements, we see the wording is that properties should keep, that the city shall have access to documents up to 5 years after the affordability period has expired. So you might want to take a look at that and see if that conflicts at all with what your current file retention policy is, so you can make needed adjustments. Some important items to be aware of when we're talking about the home program and the home units is that administration fees are not allowed for these units. Application fees must be for the cost of the credit and background check only. And we'll get into this a little bit more in some later slides, but non-optional fees and utility allowances should always be deducted from the max rent limit. So if you have, pest control fees and you require all renters to have homeowners insurance, those are non-optional fees or costs that the renters are going to have to cover. So you'd want to make sure and deduct those from the total rent that's being charged from the resident. But we'll get into that a little bit more later. So when we're talking about the initial move-in certification, um, the property is certifying that household for the home program based on the move-in date. These are all the documents that are really important to have in the file on move-in. So of course you will have your application, which should be completed, signed, and dated by all adult household members. Residency declaration is your citizenship status, completed, signed, dated for all adult household members. Valid government issued ID. Your tenant consent and release form. Your lease contract signed, dated by all adult household members. The lease should be at least a year. Then you should have an affordable lease addendum or home lease addendum, the VAWA addendum, and then lead-based paint addendum if applicable to your building. Your tick sheet, your calculation worksheet, your calculator tapes, how you calculated the income and why. Your verification of that income, so pay stubs, verification of employment form. Your asset verifications would be, 6 months of bank statements or your bank verification form that you sent off to the bank, filled out and completed. And then if your property has a utility allowance, you're going to want to include that a utility allowance form in the file as well. So a lot of properties, they may include all utilities in the rent price, and that's fine. If that's the case for your property, then you wouldn't need to worry about utility allowances or filling the sheets out and putting them in the files. But if your tenants have to pay, like maybe for their gas and electric on their own, that's something you need to factor in, which would then require a utility allowance sheet in each residence file. And then lastly, your student certification form, signed and dated by all adult household members. So we can kind of pause there for 1 second just to see if any questions have come up, or if any of that, anyone needs any additional information on what we've gone over already.
I think we're good in the chat so far.
Okay. Awesome.
I have a question.
Yeah, I
Sure.
see a hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it takes me a few minutes to get it to work, right? I'm just wondering, we're looking at moving a bunch of our people out of one building into another one. And if we move them over, we wanted to just do a 6-month lease because they've already all done a more than a year lease with us in the other building. Would that work, or would it not work from what you're saying on the 1-year lease?
Well, so your first lease, your first initial lease is a 1-year lease. And if you have language in that lease that says something like, all subsequent leases may not be the same time frame, as long as the resident has agreed to that,
Okay.
then lease renewals and subsequent leases after the first one can be shorter, right?
Okay.
But you just have to have that language in your initial lease, and the resident has to agree by signing. That makes sense.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
That was no other questions in the chat or for now?
Nope,
Okay.
we're looking good.
All right. So, okay, moving on to, oh, dang it. It started me from the beginning. Let's go through. Okay. So let's talk about the federal requirements of your lease. So with the home program, there are certain items that are prohibited from being in your lease contract. Things like the resident agreeing they can be sued, agreeing they're going to waive legal proceedings, they're going to waive their rights to a jury trial, they're going to waive their rights to legal action, termination of tenancy without good cause. Those are the things that the home regulations prohibit from being in your lease. So here's the thing. We understand, and we've seen this as we've gone through and done file audits for lots of properties, that maybe you have a standard stock lease template that needs to be used for every tenant in your property. Okay. And let's say that there is language in that standard stock lease template that conflicts with some of these prohibited areas. So we understand sometimes owners or management companies can't change that. They can't pick and choose what to remove, what to add, sometimes depending on how that lease is put together. But you should have an affordable housing lease addendum, or you should have a home lease addendum that specifically states these items and that this will supersede any language that conflicts with this in your lease. Does that make sense? So it's really, really good practice to go through your lease, read through it paragraph by paragraph, make sure that these are not in there. If they are, then it is super, super important that you have your home lease addendum that says that all these areas are prohibited. This will supersede your lease contract for these areas, and it's signed and dated by your resident. Something important to remember is that landlords are required to give their tenants, both when they're signing their initial lease and whenever they serve a rent demand, that they are giving their tenants the Denver Tenant Rights documents. There's a link there that'll take you to it. It gives the tenant all the information they need. There's also a link down here for Renter's Housing Handbook. It might be helpful for you, could be a good resource. All right. So with all home units, there should be a Violence Against Women's Act addendum signed and dated by all adult household members. This came about in 2013. Protects victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. So let's talk a little bit now about recertifications. With the home program, the property has the option for their home units to do an annual full recertification every year or only on the 6th year of the affordability period. And in between, do self-certifications. That's something that you're going to want to have documented, like a policy documentation in your property documents, so people will know what process the property follows. So the recertifications annually, the most important things, of course, is your TIC or your RIC, your income certification form, your recertification questionnaire, your consent and release form, your calculation worksheet and ticker tapes, your utility allowance sheet if it applies to your property, your verification documents, pay stubs, verification of employment, award letters, bank statements, or the bank verification form, and then your student certification form for all adult household members. So that's a full certification, right? Because you are verifying the assets. On a self-certification, the only difference is you still want to have all the same type of information, right? Your TIC or your RIC, your certification questionnaire, your tenant consent and release. So all the same thing. The only difference is that you're calculating the income based on the self-certification questionnaire, and you're not verifying the assets and income. So that's the difference. And please remember, I know sometimes it's, a lot of the properties, they don't always understand, but the home rule says that you can use the self-certification, but on the 6th year, you'll have to do the full recertification. And that 6th year is not the 6th year the resident is living in your property. It's the 6th year of the affordability period you have with the city and county of Denver. So something really important to remember there. So let's talk a little bit about acceptable forms of verification. So if somebody's employed and they have wages, an acceptable form of verification is 2 months of pay stubs or a pay printout for at least a 2-month time frame, or a verification of employment form completed by the employer, but it must at least show the year-to-date income so far. You want to make sure that your pay stubs are always consecutive and concurrent, and include everything possibly that the resident is getting paid for. And then there's a lot of residents that don't have regular wages or are not employed. So you'll have income such as Social Security, pensions, disabilities, military pensions, things like that. So please make sure that your verification of those types of income are with the most current annual award letter, as most of those types of income are the residents are given annual award letters letting them know what they're going to be getting for that current calendar year. Self-employment is another type of income that you'll have to deal with from time to time. So an acceptable form of verification would be the last 2 years of the federal tax transcripts, and a profit and loss statement. So you can then take the 2-year average. The tax transcripts will break down net profits, all the costs of operating their business. So you'll be able to see that breakdown on a tax transcript and then to get your 2-year average that way. Another type of income that can happen that you'll see from time to time is recurring contributions to the household. So, and again, this is regular, not sporadic, not occasional, but this is what we would call regular contributions. So, resident X could get $250 a month, every month, from their mom to help them out with their living costs. That is a form of income. It's regular and reoccurring, so it would have to be counted in their income total, annual household income, and you would need to verify that. And to be able to verify that, you would want to get affidavit filled out, who's giving the money, to whom, how much, on what schedule, monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, annually, signed and dated. So, and of course, there's a lot more here, we could talk about, but to keep the training to a reasonable amount of time, we just wanted to go over the most frequently seen types of incomes. But there's a link here at the bottom of the page on income definitions and sources. This will be a great resource for you for more situation scenarios. And of course, if you have anything super confusing, we're always here to help answer questions. If you want to reach out to us, shoot us an email, give us a call. We're happy to help you with any questions you have. If you do go out there to the link at the bottom, it will talk a lot about inclusions and exclusions, scenarios that you may encounter, when to include them, when not to include them. So in general, these are all the most common types of exclusions you would never count in your total annual household income. Any income from minors under the age of 18. If there's a live-in aid that has income, their income would not count. Any kind of reimbursement for medical expenses, food stamps, sporadic or temporary income, any income from HUD-funded training programs, any kind of adoption assistance, over $480 per child, hostile file pay for active military. So that's just some examples of things that would always be excluded from your total calculation. A little bit more information about asset verification. So when you are verifying a checking account, you should be requiring 6 months of bank statements or bank verification. For savings, stocks, bonds, retirements accounts, you only need to require the last month's bank statements or the bank verification. And then, of course, don't forget when you are calculating the total combined assets and then adding that total to your income, you want to remember that when you add up all your assets, if it's more than $5,000, then you would use the HUD passbook rate. It's currently at 0.4%. So the total cash value of the assets times the passbook rate, that total gets added to your total annual household income. Student rule. So the home program does have a student rule for a full or part-time student under the age of 24. They are not eligible for the home program unless they meet one of these 5 criteria. And then, of course, you have your student status certification that each adult household member is signing and dating for their file. Okay, we'll do like another pause here and check in. Any questions or concerns or anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, we will move on forward then. All right. Next, we're going to talk a little. Oh, always takes me back to the beginning. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about income limits and the rent limits. So we will publish your rent and income limits on our affordable housing webpage annually. We wait for HUD to publish theirs first, and then we put ours together using their tables. I think as of today, we're still using 2023 tables. I received an email yesterday from HUD that they have now published all their tables and they go into effect June 1. So we'll be working on that. over the next few weeks to get those published on our website as well. Okay, so every property that has a loan agreement with the city should also have an affordable covenant. They kind of go hand in hand. One gets filed, the other one gets filed. And that affordable covenant and the loan agreement will specify how many restricted units the property has to have and at what limits. So, for example, if your loan agreement or your covenant said you need 2 high home units and 3 low home units, there are specific HUD definitions of what a high home and low home mean. Most people don't have to guess. Most, I would say, 80, 90% of the time, your loan agreement and your covenant is going to tell you exactly what limits those units need to be at. And 90% of the time or more, it's either at the 50-50 limits for home or the 65-60 limits for home, one or the other. But technically, I mean, a high home unit can mean the lesser of Section 8 fair market rents or 30% of the adjusted income whose annual income equals 65% of the median income. A lone home unit can mean one of 3 things. 30% of the tenant's monthly adjusted income is going towards rent, or 30% of the adjusted income of a family whose annual income equals 50% of the median income, or a property has a federal or state project-based rental subsidy and the tenant pays more than 30% of his or her adjusted income towards rent. The maximum rent may be rent allowable under the project-based rental subsidy. But like I said, I don't think you're going to have to decipher and determine. I would say almost all of the covenants and loan agreements will specify where these units need to be at. We've had this question in the past of properties wanting to know if they can charge month-to-month fees. And our answer is always, regardless if they're in their initial first lease or a lease renewal or are on month-to-month, the rent limits for that unit do not change. So the rent limit is the rent limit, regardless if they're on the first lease, their fifth lease, or on month-to-month. So you still need to make sure that their total rent, including all fees, utility allowance, non-optional fees, month-to-month fees, all of that would still need to be at or under the rent limit. If a resident is in the middle of a lease, then you would not be able to raise their rent until they're up for a lease renewal or once in a 12-month period. And when the new rent and income limits are released, the property can have up to 60 days to implement. So now let's talk a little bit more about utility allowances. It's up to your owner and property management company what type of utility allowance structure and model that your property wants to use. Of course, you should have it documented in your policies and procedures. And then this is an example of our form that we send out to properties. We keep on file so we know which option that your property is using.
Excuse me, Leah, this is Leanne.
Yeah.
It looks like we have a question from Lynn.
All right, Lynn, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but so back one to the rental amounts there. So some programs interpret that let's say the rent limit, let's say it's what is it, 13 little bit word language, 1364, for example, for the 1 bedroom is the limit that we can charge for to the person. Some of we get ours subsidized, and so let's say we charge our COC 1568 for it, let's just say, but we would not charge the renter anywhere near that. They'd be 30% of their income. How do you interpret that?
So I think I actually have a slide coming up in just a few slides to go over that, but I think it depends what type of subsidy. So home rules say that if it is tenant-based rental assistance, it still cannot be over the rent limit. So tenant's portion of the rent, utility allowances, non-optional fees, plus your tenant-based rental assistance, all those combined cannot be over the rent limit. Now, if we're talking about project-based rental assistance, the home program does allow an exception for this. It says that you can back out that project-based rental assistance from the total rent, total effective rent, as long as that person is at no more than 50% of the AMI and paying no more than 30% of their income to rent.
Okay, that
Does
makes sense.
that
Yes.
answer your question? Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So utility allowances. If you've never seen our form before and you guys want to take a look at it, give us a shout. We'll send one over to you. Well, I would think most properties do. It just lists out all the different options that are available out there to people. Today, you want to document, in your policies and procedures, what utility allowance model your property is using. And then, of course, you want the utility allowance sheet in each tenant's file. But these are just some of the most common choices properties pick. DOLA is a really popular one. The HUD utility model is a really popular one, but it's up to you guys, whichever one you want to go with, and then we just document that's what your property uses. Oh, let me go back here. Okay, so this slide is just an example of, some people, I can explain it, but then some people want to see it to have it make more sense to them. So this is just showing you how we would look at the total rent limit for a home unit. So this example is at 80%. Most home units don't go up that high. Most of them are at the 50% or the 60, 65%. But in this example, we're looking at an 80% unit, a one bedroom. The rent limit is $17.59. So if you have utility allowances at your property, maybe your residents have to pay for gas and electric. And in this example, we're also saying that they have to pay for their own water, sewer, and trash. So we have a $146 utility allowance. Also at this property, every tenant resident is required to have rental insurance for their personal property, and that's $15 a month. So if the total rent limit on this unit, the max that this person or this unit has to stay at is $17.59. You would then have to take out from that your utility allowance, so minus 146, and then all your non-optional fees. In this scenario, it's another $15. So the most that the tenant can pay is $15.98. Did I do that wrong? 1759 minus 146 minus 15. Yeah. So, and of course, these are the limits. These are the max limits. These are the most that can be charged. You can charge less if you want. This scenario is charging a little less. So it's maxing out at 1711 instead of the 1759. But that's just an example of how we look at it. So the resident portion of the rent, utility allowance, non-optional fees, all that combined should be no more than the rent limit. Here's a slide. We talked about this, because Lynn had that question, but this is the slide that I kind of goes over that. This is really important to remember that, there are exceptions to rent based on PBRA and TBRA. The tenant-based rental assistance, it is included in your total effective rent for that particular unit. So your tenant-based rental assistance, your non-optional fees, your utility allowance, and then the tenant portion of rent, all that together still has to be at or below the rent limit. It's when you're talking about the PBRA, project-based rental assistance, that's kind of where you have a little more wiggle room because the home rules and regulations technically say it can be over the rent limit as long as that unit is at 50% of the area median income and paying no more than 30% of their income towards rent. So this slide talks about the next available unit rule. So of course, when somebody moves in, you want to make sure, of course, that they meet your income limits. But then maybe 2 years down the road, you're doing a recertification and they are making more money now. They got a raise, they got a new job, whatever the case may be. And we never ever want to give any kind of guidance that would make someone move out of their home or lose their home. So what do? Well, this is kind of where the next available unit rule comes in. The next available unit, so another 1 bedroom if this is a 1 bedroom. So that this unit itself, because they're over the income limit, it falls out of compliance. We understand that. There's not a whole lot that can be done. You can use the next available unit rule, or you can swap if you have lots of other types of or lots of other units at the property. You can always swap in another unit as a home unit. The most important things to remember are that you need to transfer that affordability. So make sure that unit meets the income limits, meets the rent limits, and they've signed the Affordable Housing Addendum or Home Lease Addendum and have the certification forms in their file. But that's basically what it is. Because your home units can always be floating. They don't have to be fixed. Marketing, advertising. These are just suggestions. Colorado Housing Search is really big for affordable homes, both for sale and rental properties. Listing your available affordable rent and income restricted units on Colorado Housing Search is really helpful because we push the public to this website. This is the only website we push them to today. So you could get a lot of traffic from this source. And of course, a lot of people use the Craigslist and the Facebook Marketplace. You can partner with your local housing authority, any kind of big businesses in the immediate area. So for a lot of communities, they kind of know the drill now. Every year around the September, October timeframe is when we try and start reaching out to all rental properties that have an agreement with the city and let them know that it's now time to do your annual rental unit compliance reporting through our portal. And then what we've also started doing a little bit more is the virtual file audit reviews, where we request your property documentation and so many tenant files documentation to make sure that, what can't be done on the annual rental unit reporting. That's what a file audit review is for, the more in-depth, property documentation and tenant file documentation, how you're calculating the income, what types of documents you have in that tenant file, is there anything missing, things like that. Of course, there's always going to be instances where some units fall out of compliance, and we understand that, and we'll document that. If there is some action that can be taken, we'll work with you until that action is taken. In some scenarios, there's nothing that can be done, so we just kind of wait and check it out again the following year. Helpful resources, affirmative marketing plan tips, the rules and regs for HUD, for home. And that's it. Do we have any other questions or concerns? Anything in the chat?
No, we don't have anything in the chat.
Can you copy and paste in the chat our link to our rental compliance resources webpage?
Yes.
So our goal is to have this PowerPoint and the recorded training session posted out on our rental resources webpage for everybody. So if you can just give us like a week or so, it'll be posted out there. You can pick up these documents or watch the training. Of course, you can call us or email us anytime. We have our main email for rental compliance is what is it? Host rental compliance at denvergov.org. Is that right, Bridget?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. But a lot of you already have our direct phone numbers and emails, so feel free to use that too. No problem. All right. Well, if nobody else has any questions, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this was helpful for you. If you have any suggestions of things that we didn't talk about that you would have liked to have heard on, shoot us an email, give us a call. We'll happily add that to our trainings going forward. But have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Leanne.
Bye.
Bye.